Hello everyone, and welcome to United States History to 1877. This is Chapter 5, The American Revolution. In this presentation, we will learn the following things. 1. The revolution was inspired by ideas intended to be an experiment in self-government. 2. The revolution was for independence, but not for democracy. 3. Once inspired, the will of the common people defined the fighting. 4. The benefits of equality were not equally shared. 5. After victory, when people continued to shape the nation. Revolution began to grow in the minds of American colonists as they increasingly saw themselves as different from their British brothers. As a part of this difference, American colonists began to reject the differences they experienced both in taxation and in political rights. Others, like Samuel Adams, argued the colonies were already separate from Great Britain. British King George III disagreed, of course. Revolutionary groups like the Sons of Liberty, of which Samuel Adams was a member, were founded and inspired by the Enlightenment philosophy. Locke wrote that all men were born equal, but made unequal by wealth. Also, each person had rights they were born with, a radical idea at the time not commonly accepted. Locke wrote that men had rights to life and liberty and property. The political ideas of nicely of the day preachers like George Whitefield, who urged his followers to take personal responsibility and to question authority and to take action. The American Revolution had other causes besides popular ideas. The effects of the 7 Years' War, also known as the French and Indian War, led to new taxes on the Americans. First of these taxes was the Sugar Act, which sought to crack down on widespread smuggling in the colonies. Another was the Stamp Act, which placed a direct tax on commonly used paper items like newspapers and legal documents. Colonists resisted these new taxes in a number of ways, through legal challenges, through boycotts, and through popular protests. Riots broke out in Boston. Tax collectors were attacked, and even high government officials were threatened. Parliament responded with the Declaratory Acts, asserting the right to tax, but still colonial resistance continued. These new taxes were really just changes in the previous control of trade in the colonies. Taxation was not new, but taxes from the British Parliament were new. The change angered many Americans. Stop now and take a moment to say out loud 3 things you can remember from the lecture so far. Don't worry about what you say, just try to remember anything. This practice of verbalization will help you create a memory of what you are hearing. In a moment, we will write down some of the information as well. Now, take a minute to record some ideas, events, or vocabulary in your notes organizer. You can pause the video and start again when you are ready. Committees of correspondence were organized groups that helped with the resistance by sending messages north to south in the American colonies so that people everywhere knew about the struggle. One such event was the Boston Massacre. On March 5, 1770, a small crowd attacked British sentries in Boston. The crowd threw stones and threatened with clubs. Soldiers opened fire, killing 5, among them an African American named Crispus Attucks. The soldiers were defended by a young attorney named John Adams and won the case. More and more voices called for resistance. Thomas Paine, an influential writer, wrote in his pamphlet Common Sense that such violence by the monarchy canceled any authority of the British king. Soon, protesters would take new steps to resist the British control. Protesters disguised as Native Americans stormed a ship, throwing tea into the harbor in an event known as the Boston Tea Party. In response, the king closed the harbor, declaring martial law and passing new laws known as the Coercive Acts. Colonial representatives petitioned the king for peace, but were rejected. While some Americans were resisting, most were not, remaining neutral or loyal to the British king. On April 19, 1775, British soldiers opened fire on militia in Lexington, outside of Boston. The battle, which started in Lexington, continued all the way to the nearby town of Concord. The people all along the route rose up and surrounded the city of Boston, trapping the British inside. Approximately 20,000 militiamen gathered overlooking the city on what is called Breed's Hill. The battle is remembered as the Battle of Bunker Hill, but it is more important to remember the battle as the moment the Americans united to fight together against the British. This is important even though the Americans lost that battle. General George Washington, who led the Americans at Bunker Hill, retreated after the battle with his forces to New York, while the Continental Congress met to draft a Declaration of Independence. Let's pause again to say out loud some of the things that stand out from the previous part of our lecture. Once you've said a few things out loud, take a minute to record some of your ideas, events, or vocabulary in your notes organizer. You can pause the video now and start again when you're ready. The Declaration of Independence was written by Thomas Jefferson, and in it he outlined the complaints against the British king. While the Declaration declared independence, it still needed to be won on the battlefield. After Boston, the war moved to New York. George Washington was quickly surrounded by a superior British army, but still managed to escape. Needing a victory before the arrival of winter, Washington won a surprise victory at Trenton. This kept morale strong after the losses in Boston and New York. Indeed, it is Washington's greatness that he kept his army inspired, as there was little reason to see hope for victory over the British. Hope did come with an American victory at Saratoga, maybe the most significant battle of the entire Revolutionary War. After winning at Saratoga, the French came to support the Americans with money, guns, and training. This little rebellion was now a global war. Ultimately, the British realized they did not have enough men or money to conquer and control the colonies. After being surrounded at Yorktown, the British offered peace. Of Paris ended the war on September 3rd, 1783. Let's take another moment now to practice saying something that you remember from the presentation. Practicing like this will help increase your memory of what you have learned. Next, take a minute to record some ideas, events, or vocabulary in your notes organizer. You can pause the video now and start again when you're ready. The war was fought by many different groups: men, women, black and white, rich and poor. With victory came the challenge of governing. The revolution unleashed powerful political, social, and economic forces that would transform the new nation. Many states created systems of popular sovereignty, allowing landowning white men to vote for representation. Virginia even included a Bill of Rights for its citizens. Pennsylvania was most radical by allowing any white male to vote. The Continental Congress ratified the first government of the United States, known as the Articles of Confederation, in 1781. Under it, every state had one vote in the national government, and there was no power to levy taxes, nor was there even a president. But while initially successful, the new government left out women, African Americans, and Native Americans. Outspoken women leaders like Abigail Adams had asked for women to be given the same equality promised to all people under the Declaration of Independence. Unfortunately, this promise was broken. Loyalists to the British king suffered after the war, despite promises that they would be protected. Many fled North America for other British colonies, leaving behind everything. Slaves were aware of the revolutionary promises of equality, and uprisings were frequent. They were put down, however, and claims of equality were ignored. During the Revolution, Native Americans had largely supported the British, who had treated them as independent nations. After the war, Native Americans would not be treated with the same respect by the new American government, and would be displaced and forced to move further west. The Revolution was significant in its promise of equality for all. After the Revolution, the promise for equality continued to inspire women and other minority groups to demand that the promise of equality be made a reality for all people. In this lesson, we learned the revolution was inspired by ideas intended to be an experiment in self-government. We also learned that the revolution was for independence, but not for democracy. And once inspired, the will of the common people defined the fighting. We also learned how the benefits of equality were not equally shared after the revolution. And after victory, the common people continued to shape the nation. This has been United States History to 1877, Chapter 5, The American Revolution. created with work from the American Yawp, an open-source history textbook by Stanford University, edited by Joseph Locke and Ben Wright, and narrated by myself, Tyler Rust.